Okay, so start the wax up now. My suggestion, especially now, is before you start your wax up, again, use my favorite tool. Use your pencil. Decide what you're waxing up. So draw where you want your flange to be. So I'm going to make the flange so it comes like this. It's going to go around that frenum. It's going to come here. It's going to come up around the buccal frenum here. So it's going to come up around that. Down here again. Long. Now, you don't have to take this right to the edge of the model. Remember we talked the other day about how, in general, smaller flanges are better on partials. You don't need gigantic flanges. Gigantic flanges are going to cause pain for the patients. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do these. This kind of wax up, as you talked about in your dentures class, you can take a piece of wax, you can warm it a little bit, you can press it onto the model, okay, and then cut it to the shape that you want. That's one way to do it. It works. I find that you have to be careful to get it to bond to the teeth. Some people like to take a piece of wax and they soften it a little bit and they roll it up. You roll it up into a kind of pencil or cigar shape. Okay, and then you can take this little piece of wax, heat it in your Bunsen, and you can just add in, it's kind of like painting with wax. This works well. I've done this a lot of times. If you've got a lot of wax up to do, if you've got a lot of wax to add, this can be a good way to do it. I find most of the time I'm just going to use an instrument and put my wax, but this can be a nice quick way to just kind of add a base layer of wax here. So I'm just going to build up a little wax. Now, I'm sure that you've talked about, there's basically two ways to do a denture, well, anything, but there's two ways to do a wax up. The first way is to wax up exactly what you want and exactly what you need. So you're going to spend more time on the wax. And you're going to make your wax absolutely perfect, you know, exactly the thickness that you want. The periphery, you're going to put in all of the anatomical details that you want. You're going to just do all of that stuff in the wax. So you'll spend more time on the wax, but hopefully you'll spend less time trimming the acrylic because all of your shape will already be there. Notice I said hopefully, because what can happen is that if something goes a little amiss in your processing, all that time that you spent waxing up was lost, because you've now lost all of that detail that you waxed up. So again, the way that I learned, and my preference is I'm going to do my wax up, put in the anatomy I need, put in the detail I need. I'm going to do all of that stuff, but I'm not going to try and make it perfect. I'm not going to wax just exactly to, I know people who add, just little bits of wax and their wax up. By the time they're finished adding their wax, it's exactly the way that they want it, and they don't hardly do any trimming to the wax, and then they process it. And the thing is, if they process it well and there's no problems with the processing, then they get exactly what it was that they wanted. But if they have any problems with the processing, then they lose all of that work that they did. On the lingual here, I just want you to make sure that you have the teeth waxed on the lingual. So just do a couple of millimeters of wax on the lingual, about 4 or 5 millimeters. I'm not going to make you make the palate on this. Do come around the posterior of your most posterior molar a little bit. Just so you can form the flange. Okay, just letting this wax harden a little bit more. Adding a little more in some areas around the necks, a little more to the distal of this last molar. Basically, I'm giving myself enough wax that I can then trim to end up with the contours that I want. So I've got to let this cool a little bit to so that it's going to give me going to be in a workable state. This is the one that we did last week as the sample. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, because when I was doing the demo for you, the wax was again too soft, so it wasn't carving nicely, because we were online and I didn't want to be sitting there for 5 minutes just waiting for the wax to set and trying to entertain you guys. This is still a little soft, so the way I start a wax up is just using a spoon on a number 7 or something. I'm just going to pull it down over the teeth like this, because the teeth have a convex shape. Just as I pull the number 7 down over the teeth, it's naturally going to form a gingival margin which approaches that convex shape of the teeth. So right there, I've started with the shape of the gingival margins. Now I'm going to use a knife blade, any one. I like my old Lacron here. I could use the Highland. This is the Zale. This is the Highland. You can use anything. I'm going to start at the most posterior tooth. I'm using my thumb as a fulcrum, and I'm just going to cut around to form my gingival margin. Now notice that my instrument is coming from the gingiva. It's coming at an angle like this. Okay? You do not want your instrument to be going down towards the gingiva like that. If I do it like this, I'm going to be able to come around, cut the shape of the teeth, and then cut the shape of the interdental papilla. This wax is still a little bit soft. And you can just follow along. The shape of the tooth will guide you. It's just wax. You're not pushing hard. Just kind of let the instrument go where it wants. And then one of my knives that has like the scoop back on the blade here, I'm just going to come back and I'm just going to flick off that wax that I just cut. And this is the same process that you're doing in dentures. And I should have a toothbrush here. There's a toothbrush just to brush away any little bits of wax that got on there. I'm going to add a little bit of anatomy. I don't go wild adding anatomy, but let's just cut this periphery first. So I drew a line where I wanted the periphery to end. So cut it to the line that you drew so that it comes right to the line. And notice that my wax at the line is fairly thick. My wax at the line is about 3 millimeters thick. I purposely built it up there. Don't have a very thin edge to your flange. You need to have a couple of millimeters of acrylic. So you need to have a couple of millimeters of wax. It does not feather. You're going to be trimming this. You can feather it down when you trim it. For the moment, you want to make sure that you have enough material there. Okay, so I've cut a little bit short there, but it doesn't make a big deal at this point. So to do a little bit of anatomy, what I'm going to do is just use the spoon on my number 7 again. And anatomy in a wax-up, you have root forms, which are bulges under the teeth, and you have the gingival collars, which are the bulges created by the free gingiva right around the neck of the tooth. So I'm going to create those anatomical features. The thing is, they're bulges. So to create those bulges, what I have to do is create grooves beside where the bulges are. So this is the tricky thing with doing your anatomy in wax-up or in trimming, is that I'm trying to create my root form, a bulge here, but I'm not working there where I want the bulge. I'm working beside it to make a groove beside where I want the bulge, and the groove that I'm making is going to create the bulge that I want. So just a very gentle groove with a fairly large spatula here. And then I'm going to come back with a smaller one, and I'm going to go along just below the gingival margin, and that's going to help to create my gingival collar. So the problem that people have with conceptualizing this is that it looks like you're drawing with a pencil. You can probably see that I'm creating lines with this spatula to create those gingival collars. The thing is that those lines aren't the important thing. They're not what I want to end up with. I don't want to end up with any lines. What I want to end up with is the bulge here that line is creating. So yes, I'm making a line, but I'm not making the line for the line. So what I'm going to do now is just using a small scoop like the one on the back of my Highland here. You guys have a Zale. I'm just going to gently draw this up. I'm just going to use it to blend together the grooves that I've made. Take off some of the little wax threads that are created there. And then I'll also just very gently pull down from the gingival margin, and that just rounds the gingival margin just a little bit. Now some people like to do stippling with a brush at this point. Personally, I don't bother. What I want in my wax-ups, I'm not particular about the anatomy that I put in. I'm going to put in a little bit of anatomy like that. What I am extremely particular about is that the teeth have to be perfectly clean, especially when you're going to process, you cannot have any wax on the teeth, especially along the gingival margin. Your gingival margins need to be perfectly clean. Just try and get rid of any little feathers of acrylic there. On the lingual, I'm just going to come across and make a fairly simple and straight gingival margin on the lingual. I'm just again going to make sure that the teeth are clean. I don't want acrylic on the linguals of the teeth. You'll sometimes see people who will completely cover the linguals of the anteriors especially. I've seen like on lowers where they've just completely covered the lingual of the anterior here with their wax and their acrylic, and they say, well, it's for retention, it's more acrylic, but that makes it really difficult for the patient to speak because you've added so much mass back there. And I don't have an alcohol torch handy, so I'll just flame that in my Bunsen for a second. And there's very basic anatomy. Just take out this little chunk of wax there. There's a little bit of wax here. Just make sure the teeth are nice and clean. And there you go. So that is your quadrant assignment, your quadrant setup project. That's what you want to do, something like that. Okay, I hope that was in the screen because I couldn't see what I was recording, so I really hope that that was in the screen for you guys. All right, cheers.